What is going on, everybody? Tonight, we will be joined by the Ringers, Danny Kelly, to talk about the Buffalo Bills draft picks for this year, a couple other signings, and see what else is going on. But first, our guys at Handsome Jack. Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You're joining your host, Greg Tompsett, along with my partner in crime, Aaron Quinn. Aaron, how mad are you that the video didn't work the way you wanted?
So bad. I'm off to a terrible start tonight, so that's great for everybody listening. I apologize to Danny. We have a huge guest, and here's me just screwing it all up, cocking up the whole system. So I apologize for our YouTube listeners. Hopefully, for the Spotify people tomorrow, it sounds normal to them, and they won't understand the hiccup here we're talking about. But my bad, y'all. I'm sorry.
So obviously today we're going to do our final show looking back at the Buffalo Bills offseason, the draft pick signings, and everything that's there with one of my favorite draft experts. And then later on, we'll talk about what's coming up as we go through the rest of the offseason with our position preview series and some of the other fun things going. But without further ado, let's dive right in and welcome our guest, Danny Kelly. Danny, how we doing?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Good. It's it's kind of into that fun, weird part of the off season. And I know for anyone who doesn't listen, I'm a huge fan. Danny's on the show with previous guests. We've had Danny Heifetz on before, Craig Horlbeck, and they do kind of an interesting mix where part of the year they do the Ringer Fantasy Show, then they convert into the draft show. Do you give yourself a little bit of a break here after the draft comes? How long until you fully switch gears?
Yeah, I think we're gonna do the fantasy show once a week during the summer, but basically we don't start ramping up really in earnest until middle of July, I think, early middle of July, and then we, kind of add more to our fantasy draft guide and things like that. Right now it's up. It's sort of the skeleton, just rankings right now, but we're gonna add, blurbs and analysis and things like that to our rankings. So we do get a little bit of a break. But yeah, it's a bit of a slog going from fantasy all year and then right into the draft. And I'm looking forward to a little downtime here.
Good. And I know for Aaron and I listen all the time. It's one of my favorite shows. We both can relate to your role on the show, as we're both in that like later 30s, early 40s window. We both have young children. Yeah. So hearing the annoying comments from Craig and Danny, not understanding references or trying to call you old, I get mad on your behalf listening to this show. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, they are, I think, late 20s, 27, 28 or whatever. So I'm obviously like the elder statesman of the pod, and they don't understand half of the stuff of our generation, of my specific micro generation or whatever. So we coined it. It was the difference between our generations is I was watching Saved by the Bell after school, and they were SpongeBob millennials. And so I'm sure there's some crossover there, but pretty much that's the cutoff.
It's like the dial-up hardware line. Like our generation dealt with dial-up internet hardware and software, and those guys though have no idea how to deal with it. But it's not a huge gap in years.
Right? It's crazy. It's crazy. I didn't even have a cell phone in high school. You know? It's like, how do you call people? How do you get a hold of people? It sounds like
honestly, careful here, because we could turn this into like a Festivus, us ranting about different millennials. I could go on for a while about this.
If you had to go meet your friends, you had to pick a spot, and if you weren't there and didn't meet at that time, you just didn't see them that night. That was it. Like you just didn't talk to them till the next day.
Or free nights and weekends, borrowing phones from parents and stuff. You get some free nights and weekends. But you talking about sort of your schedule here before we get anything to Bills specific for you. Greg and I do this all the time now. We've been doing it for years, and we only cover the Bills, and then we'll get into the draft, things like that. When do you start sort of the merging between still covering fantasy and getting the draft process started? Because it's, for me, honestly, I'm asking here in transparency of, I struggle with it every year of when to start those processes.
I do too. It's hard. It's fantasy is so busy and so, regimented schedule wise for me going through the season. Like on Monday I do this, Tuesday I do that, blah, 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 all the way through. And so it's kind of hard to fit in time to start draft stuff. And so I always start a little bit later than I want to, but typically around November, I start really gearing up and watching guys and starting to write about typically the quarterbacks and receivers and some of the like quote unquote sexy positions going into the draft. And so Yeah, I think around November. I'm going to try and get started earlier this year. I'm going to tell myself I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't have to catch up as much. But yeah,
I tell myself
hard.
a lot of
it's
really
hard.
Actually, I think I'm just going to lean more onto you guys, to be honest, because I do so much work. And when it's team specific, I'm so wrong. Like, I'll just lean on you guys for the information and catch up at the end of the season.
Yeah, our fans have heard our rant about the years that we put in all the work, and then like the Bills picked none of the guys that I really focused on or thought were fits. Like, all right, I guess I'm starting from scratch on the other guys that I'll dive into deep now.
Yeah.
So along those lines, let's go ahead and talk about it. I know that you were pretty favorable of the Bills draft here, and we'll explain a little bit why. But another quick shout out for the Ringer. Whoever does your guys' programming for the draft guide, it is the smoothest, cleanest thing on the internet. It is fantastic. I'm so jealous of the way that it's set up. I'm going to share it here. You had Dalton Kincaid as your 12th overall prospect, and we loved your shades of and your comp here. You didn't have to say it there, but you could say it here. We're very excited to hear who you were referencing in that comp.
Yeah, this is the thing that I always run into is if you comp a player to like a Hall of Famer or like the best player at his position in the NFL, people always get upset about it. So I didn't quite want to go ahead and say he reminds me of Travis Kelce, but watching him, just the way he moves, the way he can sink his hips, it can change direction. I've always said Travis Kelce reminds me of he looks like he's pretending he's surfing, the way he moves. And I could see the same sort of deal with Dalton Kincaid, just the way he accelerates out of breaks and, can run after the catch. He just has that smoothness, the fluidity to him that most tight ends, most guys his size don't have. So that was the main reason he reminded me of Kelce, his ability to run after the catch and just change direction and everything. Obviously, Kelce's a little bit bigger and, much more accomplished, clearly. But
no, I'm certainly planning on 120 catches and 1,400 yards. That's clearly what that means.
But yeah, stylistically, that's why we do shades of and not like a straight comp or whatever.
Right.
It's kind of like, you can, if you squint, you can see it. And so, like stylistically, it definitely reminded me of him. I mean, he was just incredibly fun to watch. I think I remember actually going into the analysis or just like the tape study, thinking I wasn't going to like him as much because I'd heard so much hype on him and he's like shot to the very top of like a lot of people's rankings. And I was like, I probably won't like him as much as everyone says. And I liked him like more. You know what I mean? It was like one of those things where I was like, holy crap, this guy is really good. So yeah, he was one of my favorite prospects in this draft, like period.
Do you think it's tough on folks like yourself? And because I saw a lot of pushback to this type of comp, and I always pump the brakes. Comps are stylistic. Nobody's making production predictions here based on anything. But where you're at the tight end position, and traditionally tight ends have been really pigeonholed the types of tight ends, and there aren't a lot that don't fit into those boxes that come out. And then you have this guy that does. And it is sort of hard to position him to a tight end. And it's unfair to do it to a wide receiver, even though he's a pass catcher. So you are sort of limited in the options also, even though he favors more towards a Kelce. There aren't many other options stylistically where you could go with it, right?
Right. I mean, the way that the NFL is set up right now, tight ends are very rarely the number one or number two receiver in their offense. It's generally speaking a wide receiver league at this point. In fantasy, it's really hard to find a good tight end. There's like 4 or 5 of them like in any given year. And so, I think it does limit your options. And obviously you want to comp a guy that you really like to a player who did well in the NFL. Otherwise it just like will change the sort of complexion of your scouting report. Or it's like if I comped him to, some guy that didn't do anything in the NFL, people are going like, why'd you have him ranked so high? Like, I thought you liked him. So it's kind of hard. It's kind of annoying to do comps in some ways because people, I think, jump to conclusions about it. But that's why I try and have fun with it with a lot of these comps. And, that's why I said, I'm not going to say, but I'm thinking it.
Well, and I know a couple others I had people throwing out, which were kind of from like right before that big like 2011 burst into the modern passing NFL, right before things really shifted. 2 that I really liked. I heard people reference Jermichael Finley and Dallas Clark. And they're both that kind of like, those were guys who were like kind of stood out as odd in their usage. They were really that F flex tight end, that big slot used in that way in the mid 2000s that I think were good athletes, not like hyper elite athletes, but really good athletes. But the fluidity, the way they moved were really interesting, and having, that those kind of situations where like Donald Lee was already there. And I've joked like it's impossible to use someone like Aaron Hernandez because people can only reference the story and the off field stuff. But when you had a guy that, the uber Y tight end of all time, like Rob Gronkowski, having a guy like Hernandez is kind of how I envision the usage, where like they'd run him on jet sweeps sometimes. They'd run him on all kinds of different stuff. So I think those are the comps that I see for people of how I expect him to be used. And I'm hopeful that we see him as that kind of big slot usage here going forward.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Hernandez, because I actually had a couple of people ask me if I meant Hernandez with my shades of thing there.
That's honestly, that would make sense that you're like, I don't want to say it.
That's not what I meant. But stylistically, yes, they are similar like role in the NFL, where they're going to be detached from the offensive line, probably for the most part. Trying to get mismatches, trying to get matched up against linebackers or whatever, and get them in space. And so, stylistically, that's a good match.
So I think my direct quote on draft night was a slightly less murdery Aaron Hernandez.
Right.
Unbelievable. So we were talking a little bit offline here, and one of the problems that Bills Mafia is having internally with the conversation about Kincaid is obviously pinpointing him to a position and then projecting what that should look like in terms of what should we expect for production from a first round pick. You were traded up for this first round pick. So we're obviously going to put him under a microscope, and he's got to live up to a certain level of production. But what would you say for Bills Mafia to sort of on a hybrid player like this? Should we expect traditional tight end rookie production, or should it be leaning more towards wide receiver, or should we just kind of get rid of all these barriers and just enjoy how he's going to impact the offense regardless of the production?
It's so tough. I mean, it's just impossible to predict what tight ends are going to do early on. Generally speaking, in the past, if you had high expectations, you're going to be disappointed with how rookie tight ends are going to do. I do think you make a good point where, he's going to be used more as a receiver. And I think that there's a real opportunity with sort of the lack of a true number 2 or number 3 in this offense. You know what I mean? Like, this is one of the biggest takeaways I had from watching the Bills last season. Is they just need more guys that are going to make plays for them in the offense. And
they lost that Cole Beasley controlling the middle of the field.
Yeah. And so he really has an opportunity here to go in and do like produce at a high level, even if he's not necessarily, really refined or polished in terms of what he's doing. The thing that I think makes it hard for a lot of tight ends in the NFL going into the NFL is they're asked to do so much blocking, and that's just like very difficult. There's so many responsibilities. You have to get stronger. You have to learn the techniques. You're going up against, veterans that really know how to get off blocks. And it's just so difficult to get on the field and do anything when you're a rookie tight end. But with the way that he's going to be used, maybe that won't matter as much. You look last year, like Chig Okonkwo for the Titans led all rookie tight ends in receiving last year. He had 450 yards, and it didn't feel like he even played that much. In fact, he had 36% 36% snaps for the Titans last year. I would assume that Kincaid plays something closer to like 70 or something like that snaps, 70%. So,
we went through an
I'm just going to throw out a number like 700 yards or something like that. Wouldn't be like a huge surprise to me, honestly. 600 yards.
I think that's really where the space, if you look at the Bills were, I think, last in the NFL in 12 personnel usage. So if that just goes up to league average or slightly above, which obviously an investment like this plus the Dawson Knox contract, it's going to be. True. And then you look last year, Quentin Morris played like 28% of snaps. And again, only 4% were in 12 personnel. So that means that 24% of his snaps were him as the only tight end on the field. So if you now use that as a starting point, all of a sudden, simply using Quentin Morris and increasing 12 personnel, you're at 50% without anything else. Yeah. So now if you dial back a little of Dawson Knox, where, hey, he only does 70% of there, and you give him a little bit more, all of a sudden you can get to where it's like 60 and change for each of them. They play pretty much 50-50 out of the 11 personnel snaps, and then we increase our 12 personnel usage, and now you have a really nice split. And I think, again, if we get him on the field 60-70% of the time, you're going to see pretty decent production.
Yeah. Real quick, I want to surprise you guys here. I wasn't planning on doing this, but we're talking about production. A couple weeks ago, I did some production numbers from the 2022 draft class and the 2021 draft class, from the picks from the first half of the first round down through the end of the second round. So like picks 15 through whatever, end of the second round. And average production for the 2022 class for yardage was 470 yards and 4 touchdowns. Obviously, there's some stinkers in the class that bring that down, like Wan'Dale Robinson didn't have much. But in the 2021 class, nobody even registered in that first year. Only 2 people registered with about 400 yards. So the rest of the people didn't even register for the PFF minimums. In terms of expectations for rookies, like even wide receiver rookies, in that it is a first round pick, but it's a late first round pick, right? So we have to probably give it more of a second round evaluation ish for what you should expect. So just in terms of trying to set expectations for people for what a guy should do, he's not even a receiver. Maybe it'll be less than that.
Yeah.
So now let's switch. Obviously, you had to be really disappointed that the Bills in their first pick picked your 12th overall prospect, and for their second round pick, they had to go all the way to your 18th ranked prospect.
Crazy.
So really frustrating.
That's a good job. I don't really understand why he fell.
Yeah, what happened here? How'd the Bills end up? Because you're not alone in talking about that. You know, we saw consensus mock drafts having him to the Bills in round
Kevin,
one.
Yeah, Kevin Cole was on last week, and we talked through. He was the biggest outlier on the second round of away from the consensus board.
Yeah. So what happened?
You know, it might have just been lack of positional versatility. Just straight up, he's a guard only. I would assume
fits for certain offenses too. Maybe.
Exactly. You have to have the right fit in terms of what type of offense you're getting him into. There might be some concerns over like his ability to stay at the right weight. You know what I mean? There's some issues with that potentially, and so these are all a couple of reasons why he could have fallen. I don't know if there was anything medical or if there's anything personality wise that teams were a little bit worried about. I'm not privy to that, but it was surprising to see him fall that far, because when I watch him, number one, he's just extremely powerful, extremely fundamental in terms of just making his blocks, getting guys blocked, really strong, decently mobile in terms of at least relative to his size. There was a lot to like. And then at the Senior Bowl, he was very impressive. He was, just physical and dominant as a blocker in his one-on-one situations. And so, it was a little bit surprising that he fell into where did he get taken late in the second round?
59.
Yeah. I don't know. That is very bizarre, but I think that's an awesome value, clearly, based on where I had him ranked. And I think he looks to me like a plug and play type of guard, just get him in there and let him learn the ropes. And I like that he's like really wide bodied and he's just going to like get in the way, and he's really strong, physical, tough. He's played a lot of games. So that's also like kind of a nice bonus. It's not like he's going to be learning on the fly. He has, I don't even know, like 40 something starts on his resume. So he's a really good player, I think. And that's an amazing value right there.
So I know part would be, getting to see you down in Mobile was fun, but seeing him is the biggest hands I've ever seen in my life. When we went down on the field afterwards and did interviews the second day, I kind of waited and got a chance to talk to him. And afterwards he stuck his hand out, and like, I have big hands. Like I don't have small, I have like 10-inch hands. And like, I've never had someone like just envelop my entire hand. And I'm like, I've never experienced this before. I'm not a small man. What the hell is going on? And it's the biggest hands I've ever seen in my life. So when you see on tape, all of a sudden other like large, SEC defensive linemen, and you see them, he gets his hands on him, it just goes boom, boom, down to the ground. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that kind of checks out. All right.
I mean, that's the size thing matters, man. Like the big players in the NFL, it's a big man's game, and he's very powerful. Like I said, I just think his ability to drop an anchor. Maybe it does help too that he got to play with a guy like Anthony Richardson, because I think stylistically, Josh Allen, in terms of his ability to escape the pocket and at least just sort of knowing how to work with a mobile quarterback, quote unquote, mobile quarterback guy who's going to scramble around a bunch. That could come in handy too for him. So I like the fit. I honestly, like, I put him in mock drafts to the Bills in the first round plenty of times in the pre-draft process. And so getting him late in the second is obviously, a good deal for you guys.
I love it. And then anyone else here stand out for you with the Bills and their overall draft, how they did, or is that pretty much a top heavy for them?
I think the Justin Shorter pick is an interesting one. I think former 5-star guy, former big time recruit, obviously has incredible size. And
his workout picture went viral in Bills Mafia after the draft.
Looks like DK Metcalf out here in terms of like his body.
The special teams helps too.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
get him active on game days. And again, like it's kind of it's the Kincaid discussion too. It's like there's an opportunity here. If he comes in and does what they ask him to do, he's obviously not going to be like a big volume guy early on, but blocking, doing the dirty work. Yeah, he's the one thing that kind of stood out to me when I was watching him is he's really good at running these like deep crossing routes, getting over the top of the defense. And obviously he's a massive target. So just kind of throw it up in a zip code and he'll come down with it. I don't know. This could be something that works well with like the type of quarterback that Josh Allen is, where he's just, trusting guys to come down with balls. And so I don't know, that to me, that's a pretty interesting one. 5th round.
Your point,
a little bit higher
your
than
point
I was
on,
but I like that fit.
Your point on O'Cyrus Torrence that playing with Richardson helps. I feel like that probably is even more so with Shorter in that when a play breaks down, where to go, and playing with a mobile big arm quarterback like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You get the scramble drill, kind of understand where you want to position yourself relative to the defense and how to break off your route and come back to the ball. I just thought he was, and obviously with the Richardson being a little bit scattershot in his accuracy, like he was having to kind of like contort his body and come back for balls and things like that. So, he's got a big catch radius. So I don't know. He's kind of an interesting one. I'm not expecting anything necessarily, but anytime you got a guy who's like a former 5-star with that kind of physical attributes, it's
those are the best. No expectations and high potential ceiling. Love that.
And so 5th round, that's nothing either. Yeah.
Oh yeah. If it misses, it's nothing, and if it hits, it's fun. Like Matt Milano is the perfect example.
Yes,
the Bills found him in the 5th round. It's been fantastic, and other ones like, it's a 5th round pick. Who cares?
Right.
And having him is the perfect mix because obviously Bills fans got frustrated last year seeing Isaiah Hodgins go to the Giants and then put up production why? And we were trying to explain a big piece of it was he couldn't get on the field and the
opportunities.
And now you have Shorter. He's going to have a jersey on game day because he can cover kicks. He can go down and play 4 phases of special teams. And then when you need a guy to step in, even if it's the 10% of snaps that Gabe Davis just needs to break, he can do that. And if he shows something, that's great. And if he doesn't, he's just better than Jay Kumaro. It's just you have a guy that hey, he's going to go cover kicks, and now maybe there's some upside along with it. And you have that instead of having a guy where, hey, if we're going to call up Hodgins, it's only when he's going to come in and play. And then we got to have somebody else. Now Jordan Poyer has to do special team snaps, or you have somebody else that we don't want out there playing special team snaps. Now you have guys that can do that and soak those up and just be a bonus when they contribute in scrimmage.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So one final one before we get you out of here. I know most people know you for your draft coverage for your fantasy work. You're also a Seattle Seahawks fan. So I have been pounding the table about wanting Poona Ford. I wanted one of Daquan Jones and Poona Ford on the field at all times, and had been just pounding the table for it. And then amazingly, it came true. Help those fans understand a little bit of what they're going to see. I got a little too excited. I think people got their expectations a little too. I'm like, hey, he's a run stuffing one tech. He's going to rub his belly sometimes. It's going to get people excited, but let's dial it back. He's not going to come in and have 10 sacks. But let fans know why I'm excited about having a player like that and why he was a fan favorite in Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, I think just the combination of obviously he's a rotund fella in the middle of the defense, but he's also got some twitch to him, some explosiveness, the way he moves. He can be, I think, he can be a gap shooting type of player, and get into the backfield and kind of make havoc there. I think Seahawks fans were disappointed that they didn't bring him back. It was kind of strange. They need interior defensive linemen. Maybe he was playing a little bit out of position in the kind of what the way the Seahawks were trying
to shift into that odd front, maybe.
Yeah. And he wasn't maybe a fit for what they wanted to do. And I think that actually speaks to, Ford's quality, it's more like less of a scheme fit than they didn't like him, if that makes any sense. And so, he was, we got Mina Kimes always does Poona Hive. And, he's just a fun player. He obviously undrafted guy, but came in and made the team and did his, contributed to the defense and made some flashy plays here and there just because he's a big, like gap shooting type of player at times. And so, yeah, to be honest with you, like I haven't studied him closely lately. I just kind of get caught up in fantasy and the draft and stuff. I haven't really studied the Seahawks as much as I used to, but fan favorite, like people love him. And like I said, he's twitchy and explosive for his size. He's obviously very undersized. I think he's like 6 feet.
They list him at 5'11", which is
his wingspan
really,
though they say is 6'8".
Yeah,
right. He's got really long arms, good length. Yeah,
80
and he's just a fun player to watch. And so I think Bills fans are really gonna like him.
Side note, as a draft dude and a Seahawks fan, I liked their draft. Pretty good, right?
Oh, I was so stoked, And of course, it was like it can't be a Seahawks draft without like a early running back pick
for sure.
Charbonnet,
but I love Charbonnet.
Made people so mad fantasy wise.
Just classic.
I love him. Yeah.
But honestly, you know what? It makes sense to me, and I'm not just rationalizing. I think obviously the value is a question mark, but the Seahawks just don't give a crap about that. Yeah. But they lost Rashad Penny, which was a little bit like we were like, why would you let him go for $1 million or whatever the Eagles wanted to sign him for? Yeah. That was a little bit mystifying. Obviously, the injury is probably the big thing. They just didn't feel that they could be, reliable. He was very reliable or whatever. But they lost him. They lost Travis Homer. Kenneth Walker was a little bit banged up towards the end of the last season, and I think they went into this year or in this draft looking at running back as a need because they want to be able to always have that element to their game. And Zach Charbonnet, the first time I watched him, I'm not even kidding, I wrote down Sea Hockey running back. You know what I mean? Like that was like the first thing I wrote down. I'm like, the Seahawks are going to love this guy. And sure enough, they picked him. So I'm bummed, and I wish I would have put it in my actual scouting report, but I was looking back at my spreadsheet and I was like, Sea Hockey running back. And I was like, damn it. Just because he's a hard charger, explosive guy, physical, kind of good contact balance as he can absorb hits and kind of stay upright and everything. He's pretty good pass catcher, or at least I think he's got the opportunity to carve out a role there. I actually really liked their 7th round pick, Kenny McIntosh too. Yeah. So but overall, like Jackson Smith and Jigba, one of my favorite players in this draft. Devin Witherspoon, just so much fun to watch. He's a tone setter on defense. It's like the old Legion of Boom type of guy. Like I think they're wanting to, with San Francisco in the division, the 49ers defense is sort of like the alpha dog of the division. And I think the Seahawks are trying to get back that sort of like mantle. Like that was what they were for so long. They were the fearsome Legion of Boom. And they just frankly have not been even remotely that in the last like 6 or 7 years or whatever it's been. So getting a guy like Witherspoon, who is, he's talking trash to guys even when he gets beat. You know what I mean? Like he's so he's just so like intense. It's so fun to watch, and it really does rub off on his teammates. Watching that defense, they had some dudes on that Illinois defense, and he was just like sort of the tone setter. But they all kind of like took on his personality, I feel like, in the secondary. So I'm really excited to see him play and kind of like what he can bring to the defense.
It's going to be exciting to see. So we appreciate your time tonight. Let the people know where they can find your fantastic work coming up and what else you have coming.
Yeah, so you can check out my draft guide at nfldraft.theringer.com, and then you can check out our Ringer fantasy football rankings at fantasyfootball.theringer.com. Check out the podcast that I host with Danny and Craig. It's called the Ringer Fantasy Football Show. And I think that's about it for now.
Also, you'll be able to find the links to those in the show description down here below. So make sure you check that out. And Danny, we appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
All right, thank you. We'll talk soon. So always fun to have Danny jump on and be able to kind of talk through. And obviously, I had kind of reached out to him and had it set up beforehand, but then seeing that the Bills picked his 12th and 18th player on his draft part, I was like, oh, this worked out just great. This is fantastic.
And a Seahawks fan on top of it.
Yeah, the Poona thing was even way after we had already set up the date that he was going to come on. So everything worked out really nice.
Here's the problem, Greg, though. This is what I keep coming back to. And I'll call him out by name because he called me out by name on another podcast. My friend Nate Geary. That argument, though, of like this conversation about this player, especially Kincaid, when the trade up for a first round pick, I keep coming back to like, I'm not a draft guy, but I do follow smart ones. And all the smart ones that I've talked to or have listened to, Greg Cosell, Connor Rogers, Daniel Jeremiah, Dan Kelly, Danny Kelly, like all these national like people see the value, they see the weapon, they see that this could be something good. And that's where I'm not willing to argue with anybody else that enough smart people are saying that at least on paper, at least how this looks, where you could project it, it looks good and makes sense.
Yeah. And you want to know what? Like, that's fine. If you want to, it got into this weird thing where, and I mean, I did it 45 seconds after the pick. So I'll take some of the blame.
I'll blame you maybe like 50%
for starting this. 45 seconds after the pick, I tweeted, he's a slot receiver. Dalton Kincaid is a slot receiver. The Bills drafted the best slot receiver available on the board. And
probably too far, right?
Correct. I overstepped in the fact that I had to dial it back later on with like, hey, it benefits the Bills to call him a tight end. It benefits the Bills for defenses to consider him a tight end. It benefits the Bills to pay him as a tight end. It benefits the Bills for other defenses to match their personnel to him as a tight end. But if we use him like a slot receiver, and I think that his snap percentage at Utah last year was 54% of the snaps out of the slot. If that's what we're going to see here, and it might even be a little bit higher than that, then that means we're going to have that kind of usage. So I get it that we went that way. There was obviously a contingent of, Bills content creation people and including folks on the radio like Nate, who were adamant that the Bills needed a wide receiver. So I think there was this weird pushback that, well, he's not a wide receiver, so they didn't do what we recommended that they do, so we need to be against this. And it just wasn't necessary. Hey, they drafted a pass catcher. This is a good thing. And now all of a sudden their hedging was, well, then fine. If you're going to call him a receiver, then we have to hold him. He has to do the same thing Justin Jefferson did.
I agree with you. I think, that's part of it. And I think there was a blindsided to this pick, which I also felt a little bit blindsided. I wasn't expecting it. Right? And so I think people try to reconcile, okay, I'm blindsided. How do I judge this pick? And I think that is gotten to a little bit. What do I set for the narrative later, right? Like I got to set a bar so I can say this was good or bad, and then I can yell at somebody about it at a later time. But I think it narrows down to too binary with this type of player of like judging him to a tight end or judging to wide receivers. And again, I do think it's important to look at real expectations of rookies. People are going to highlight first round picks like Jamar Chase, and they're going to highlight whoever of this first round of wide receivers has the best season. Everyone's going to say, see, compared to that guy. And that's not fair. I think it's going to be difficult to probably find reasonable expectations for this player. But I even think Danny Kelly's that 600 yards probably too high for year one. I think it's achievable. I think he can get there.
I think it's the high end. 600-700 would be
there's potential for him to get there, but I do think it would probably be closer to these averages I was talking about of like a 400-500 yard year and sprinkled in slow. I could see the Bills kind of getting this going slowly. So getting those expectations in line and having a real conversation about what the value is. Yes, first round picks are valuable, but we really need to set the difference between the high first round, that first half of the first round, and with the back half of the first round. And then what we traded, everyone was like, oh, you traded that fourth round pick. Like set some real expectations of the value there as well.
Yeah. And obviously, we'll see where it goes. No pass catcher in this draft went in the top 19 picks. We waited all the way to pick 20. And that first guy, people are going to have interesting expectations for JSN. He's going in as the third option behind Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. He's not going to jump in as like the number one option in that offense. In a run heavy offense. So we'll see where those things go. I'm fine. Whatever. I would set whatever bar you want. And honestly, we joked about the Poona Ford thing. You want to know a big piece of it? It was the opposite of the Poona Ford thing. I had all those previous tweets to go back and grab me. Go here, look at my receipts. Nobody had any Dalton Kincaid receipts, so nobody was out there pumping their, beating their chest. Oh, I predicted this. I told you they were going to take Dalton Kincaid because it kind of okey doked us. We weren't expecting that to be the pick, so nobody was out there pumping their chest. Oh yeah, I told you this was one. So it took everybody a couple days to get their head around. Okay, well, we just paid Dawson Knox $14 million, and now we traded up for a tight end. That's kind of weird. So it took a minute for people to get their head around. And like I said, I overcorrected with my tweet, but the usage is that, hey, he's he's going to play an awful lot of slot receiver snaps, and that we're going to be out there. And our goal is that defenses struggle, and that some teams will treat Dalton Kincaid and Dawson Knox like 11 personnel. And in those games, we can run the ball a little bit easier. And some defenses will say, oh, well, we don't want that. And then the next game, they'll treat it like 12 personnel and match with a linebacker. And then Dalton Kincaid will have a nice game. And, that's exactly what you want, is you want defenses to struggle and not to know how to match up with the personnel usage. And that's ideally how you do it. And even better, I hope that they get really frustrated when we go with 22 personnel because they don't know what to consider Reggie Gilliam. And now all of a sudden you can put all those guys out and they can all run patterns. And being able to do that and to pass out of those traditional heavy sets where we can also still run the ball, it's still fine. And for Dalton Kincaid's a better blocker than Khalil Shakir or Cole Beasley. To have that option, I think it's going to be interesting. I'm curious to see where it goes, and wherever they want to set the expectations. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately it for me. Is I really have no expectation because I haven't seen this type of player, this type of prospect, and I see how it can get used in the offense. I've seen similar type of players in this position, but I think he's more athletic than the ones that we've seen playing in this position traditionally in the NFL. So I'm excited in that I don't know where to set that bar. And to your point, who cares? Like, let's see how it impacts, because I think there's going to be a lot of non-quantitative impact here from Kincaid and what you're saying, and dictating, being that chess piece that says, hey, like, we want to get a team. This team tends to play a little bit more nickel. They play a little bit smaller. We want to get them into base so that we can spread the ball out a little bit more. Or we want to match up against that nickel defender and get a big body on him and get those easy first downs and get some leverage in zone defense, different things like that. That's what they were missing last year. Isaiah McKenzie was super limited in that slot role to only being able to do anything one-on-one against man coverage. And a lot of teams weren't playing the Bills in man. When you're playing teams like led by Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen, where plays break down, you're playing a lot of soft too high shell stuff. So you need guys that can understand leveraging zones, things like that. We've seen that at least on tape. Go back and watch Eric's film rooms and stuff from Kincaid. Yeah. So those types of pieces might not lead to huge amounts of production. I think it will, specifically in the red zone, which will make all these conversations go away when he starts lighting up touchdowns and doesn't have a ton of yards. Nobody's going to care. If he has
380 yards but 9 touchdowns, everybody's going to be fine.
Yeah, but I think even less than that, the matchup opportunities that it presents for the other players on the Bills is going to be big. A lot of talent is on this team, and I think Dorsey has to do a job of scheming some of this up, but there are going to be times where some of these guys just don't have opportunities to get the ball, right? There's just one ball to go around. There's a lot of mouths to feed right now. And there are going to be games where Kincaid just doesn't have the impact on the box score, but it doesn't mean that he's not impacting games.
Yeah. So there's a question back here that I want to answer that Corey had asked. What are the chances all 4 of Cook, Harris, Murray, and Hines make the team?
I think Murray could be your practice squad.
87%?
Yeah.
I think it's pretty high that all of them make it. I will tell you, their contracts say all of them have a really, really good chance. None of them have the like the Duke Johnson structure last year, where there was kind of like, hey, here's enough money that if we cut you, you'll still be happy to stick with us on the practice squad, but not so much money that it is weird if we cut you. Sure. You want to know some players who got that exact kind of money this year? AJ Klein got that amount of money. Cam Lewis got that amount of money. The same as Duke Johnson last year, where it's like, hey, here's like 100 or 200 or even 300,000, and then you get like 300,000 being a practice squad player. So like, hey, it's almost like having a minimum contract. Why don't you hang out with us? They gave Damian Harris is almost a fully guaranteed contract. They guaranteed like 1.7 of his 1.77. He's making the team. James Cook obviously is making the team. When Nyheim Hines made his pay cut with the team, where he did restructure to help the team, they pretty much guaranteed all the rest of the money. He's making the team. Those 3 are locks. Like, not a lock, because OJ Howard was like that last year. So there's a chance that Damian Harris just looks at crap in camp and they just eat the money and cut him. It's pretty rare. OJ Howard is one of the very rare exceptions when the team has done that. Latavius Murray is, I think, like 85, 90%. They guaranteed him almost $700,000. So like, they're already paying most of his money, whether he's on the team or not, which I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting him to get the Duke Johnson contract. I was expecting him to get $150,000 in guaranteed money, which is like the little bit extra. They're like, hey, here's a little enough that you're cool coming in. And then, if we cut you, you'll hang on a practice squad, but that's a little extra money and you make like $550 overall. Guaranteeing him like almost $700,000 now is like, he's going to make the team. So it's not guaranteed. That 52nd and 53rd spot is going to be incredibly tightly contested. Guys like Quentin Morris, guys like Tommy Doyle, David Questenberry, David Edwards, guys like Boogie Basham, guys like Tim Settle, AJ Klein, Balin Spector, Cam Lewis, Saran Neal. Like, I just rattle off like 8 or 9 names, and maybe 4 of them are going to make this team. Maybe 5. Like 4 or 5 of the names I just rattle off are not making this team. So getting through there. Corey here follows up. I do not expect any UDFA to make this roster. None made it last year. Only one made it the year before. We're just not at the phase of our build. And
it's going to be even harder when they trade for Dalvin Cook and find Justin Houston. So,
hold on. So they're not going to trade for Dalvin Cook because I think the news earlier today came out that the Vikings are going to designate him a June 1st cut.
Oh.
So I'm not interested in trading for a $13 million Dalvin Cook. I'm not uninterested in free Dalvin Cook. we talk about that a little bit later. Maybe that'll be for our running back show, which will be coming up in 2 weeks. Maybe we'll talk about that. But
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's not official. It's been Diana Rossini reported it, and like 2 other people said they're hearing that it is strongly leading down a path.
I mean, nobody wants to
that he's going to be designated. No one's going to take the contract. No one is taking a $13 million contract. They don't have the space to extend Danielle Hunter and Justin Jefferson.
Right.
And they
running backs.
They get $9 million back in cap space if they cut him.
Right.
So there are guys I like. Isaiah Bowser is an interesting player. There are other guys. I know people like DJ Dale. I know people like some of the other UDFAs that got signed. And you want to know what? Terrell Shavers, a wide receiver, is interesting.
2013 anymore, though.
Yeah, Richard Garage. We don't have room for this. Heck, I don't think either of our 7th round picks are going to make the team. I don't think Alex Austin or Nick Broker are going to make the team. Nick Broker's got a shot if we trade one of like a David Edwards.
I could see Austin maybe taking over the Dane role, but it might still even be a year out. Get him on the process.
And on top of that, so you want to talk about some of the players, the what I talked about with the contract for Damian Harris. Right. Taylor Rapp's contract's almost fully guaranteed. Yeah. Terrell Dotson's contract is fully guaranteed. Tyler Medikevich's contract is fully guaranteed. Dane Jackson's contract is fully guaranteed. We paid those guys $2 million, fully guaranteed. They're making the team. They are. Those guys are all making the team. There are just, when you go through, it's a good exercise for fans to go through and do. Try to do your own 53-man projection. You can't do it. Like you are going to cut multiple players that you really like. You are going to cut multiple guys.
Or there are going to be players with this guaranteed money that get cut and the Bills are going to be paying some money.
And again, they've done that once in the past 5 years. So again,
but are we in a new spot?
Maybe it happens one more.
So
one more time.
Maybe this is part of the where with this roster is that it started the downside of you are too flush for some of these late round pick undrafted free agents. But if they legitimately win out jobs and can, then your hands are tied and you're cutting fat and dealing with the consequence of that fat, right?
Absolutely. And those things have happened. We have had, Christian Benford is a good example last year. Mm-hmm. So if Alex Austin or DJ Dale or Isaiah Bowser or Terrell Shavers have a Christian Benford camp where it's, oh my God, we can't keep this guy off the field. Yeah. He's special. This was a find. Absolutely. That's possible at any spot. That is possible at any spot. If a guy just forces his hand that, hey, and then all of a sudden it's, you want to know what? We didn't really want to eat the guaranteed money of, and it wouldn't even happen because some of those positions are actually pretty easy to do. So if you're in a spot where it's like, oh, we didn't really want to eat the guaranteed money of Dane Jackson, you can trade a $2 million corner at cut down day and get a future pick, and then you don't eat any money because guaranteed salary goes with. So if you get to that spot where, hey, here's one. How about in training camp, Ramondre Stevenson gets hurt, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, hey, you guys just want Damian Harris back for $1.7 million? You can have him back. There are spots like that. David Edwards' contract is almost guaranteed. I think 1.7 of his 1.77 million is guaranteed. So David Edwards isn't getting cut, but it also means all that money could go with if he gets traded.
Sure.
So there are spots like that where if Richard Garage has some ridiculous camp and just is impossible to keep down, or Nick Broker, if Nick Broker has an amazing camp, it might trigger another guy to get traded. I don't think the linebackers are the ones. You can't really trade linebackers.
No, linemen are probably the easiest.
Linemen and corners. Those are the two that people would be most willing to trade for. Offensive and defensive linemen both, and then defensive backs, corners specifically. Cool. So we'll see where those things go. I saw your eyebrows raise. I like our running back room. Would you still be willing to eat some money if it meant adding a Dalvin Cook?
I don't know. I'd have to go check the recent. I mean, he cut up the Bills, but that was a terrible blown play by Buffalo. But I'd have to take a look at how he looks now. The eating the money, I don't mind all that much. It's not a ton. Like this isn't
even if
bad.
it was Damian Harris, if it was 1.7 million and we had to eat that. And again, you probably could trade him to somebody.
Sure. Yeah, there's some opportunities for you available. Yeah, I would kick the tires on it. I would prevent Kansas City from doing it if it was like,
I don't love him going to Miami or Kansas City.
Yeah, I think there's some teams that I would try to get ahead of if there was at all a possibility, and then I would still probably find it as an upgrade. So it's not something I'm not seeking out otherwise, adding running backs to this room, but really just the keeping him off other teams that are flush with offensive talent. I don't want to see that come to the AFC at all.
Yeah. So Spin here saying we will not be able to afford Cook. He's going to get a nice chunk of money.
This could be just a ring chase.
So he's going to probably sign, and late no team has a lot of cap space. So he will very likely sign a cheap 1-year deal, hoping to get his last count, because actually he's only 27. So he will likely be, now again, he might wait a little bit, seeing if somebody wants to sign him to some huge multi-year deal.
Could be an injury could pop up.
Yeah. So maybe he bides his time a little bit. But he will very likely sign a cheap deal with the most guaranteed touches is the biggest thing. And
Zeke's still out on the market.
Correct. So there's a couple of those. The biggest draw the Bills are going to have is they'll be like the third tier. So obviously he's first going to be checking for who gives me the most money. Sure. Okay, nobody's giving me huge guaranteed money. All right, next, who's giving me the guaranteed starting job? Okay, honestly, I don't know if there's anybody that's going to give him the guaranteed starting job right off the bat. So then you get to the third tier, and leave this one up from Tony. That's going to be the interesting part, is either one way or the other. Is he going to see that as a positive of, okay, nobody's giving me the money, nobody's giving me the guaranteed starting job? Do I go, hey, I guess it'd be kind of cool to play with the Super Bowl contender and play with my brother for a year? Or would he be nervous about getting in the way of his brother's big opportunity? Because, I think our team is one of the few, in Kansas City, sadly, maybe the other one, where he probably would come in and be the number one guy. Like I like James Cook
for a Super Bowl, right?
He probably would be the number one guy initially. So I don't think he would come in and be the dominant bell cow back, but he'd be the 1A over his brother's 1B. I think he still would. Last year was his worst season in a while. It was still 4.4 yards carry. Sure. It was still 8 touchdowns. He still had 39 catches for another 300 yards. He had 1,400 total yards.
We're assuming that James will be sort of the primary here. Is that are we jumping the gun on that assumption? Anyway,
Damian Harris had a 15 touchdown season. Latavius Murray's had 550 yards every single year for 8 straight seasons.
And pass protection will be something that, I know he got better as the year went on last year and cleaned up some of the problems that he was having.
Harris and Murray are both very good at it.
Yeah, I don't know. That might be a thing to keep an eye on. Anyway, you're talking about getting in the way of his opportunity. I'm wish casting James Cook into being a primary part of this offense, and I think that a lot of us are. And maybe we shouldn't jumped the gun on that before training camp. Maybe that'll lead us into talking about our positional previews coming up.
Yeah, so that's going to be where we come up here. And I don't know if I expect anything immediate to happen with Dalvin Cook. And, I'm sure we'll have a time to dive in a little bit more on what else is out there and what he looks like if he does get released. And very similar to our interest in DeAndre Hopkins, it's half for the, big name, formerly elite player. And the other half is just don't let him go to the Chiefs, please. Yeah. So if we need to find a way to add him so the Chiefs can't, sure. I'm on board for that.
Sure.
But as Aaron referenced, we will be starting next week, kicking off our position preview series, going with we'll be doing quarterbacks and coaching next year because they kind of go hand in hand. Some of those discussions of Josh Allen and Ken Dorsey, and then the shift of Sean McDermott to being defensive coordinator and calling the plays on defense. So we will start down that path and then go through each group: running backs and specialists. We'll do wide receivers, we'll do tight ends, offensive line, defensive line, linebackers, secondary, the whole way through. And each of those shows, as we ramp up, will take us all the way to training camp, which is crazy that we're already in that mode. So I know it's always an interesting time to do this, but it's fun because we really get to drill down and talk about the guys on the team and what position that puts them in and what we think they're going to achieve, different, statistical projections. Some of them have more debatable roster capabilities or who are cut down day trade candidates. Some are not as much of that are more, kind of set in stone, but it'll be a fun topic to go through.
This year will be a little bit interesting too. Last year felt more of a kind of not a great process to go through. We pretty much knew the team. I think, starting here with the coaches and then some of these position groups, there's really going to be the potential for some big philosophical shifts in how we're using them versus what we've traditionally seen from the Sean McDermott era of football. So for me, that's exciting of a potential change while we're going through some of the roster and how the guys are going to be used traditionally versus how they have been.
Awesome. Yeah. It's going to be interesting in some of the pieces that we'll debate. And I think that there's a few pieces there. And as Roy asked here, when is your way too early 53-man roster projection? We'll talk through that with each position group as we kind of debate and talk about who we think is going to make the team. We'll talk through that with each of those in the groups as they go leading up to camp. And then we'll likely do one heading into camp and one coming out of camp. So that'll be a fun one to be able to look at as we get ready.
Yeah.
Any final things for the people? When are you and Chris getting together for your next spaces?
I haven't talked to Chris yet, but we will probably be going back to our regular Friday morning 9:30 thing. What I'm hoping though, Greg, I'm in Western New York here. I don't know how it is for you. I'm hoping when I wake up tomorrow that it was not too cold. It started to get real cold outside here. I put my plants in the ground already. I'm a big plant garden guy.
Yeah, we got a frost warning here.
I've got a frost warning too. And so I spent actually before the show, I was a little late that the video got all effed up. I think this was me rushing around trying to cover all my plants out there. It's only one day. Tomorrow's going to be 65.
Yeah, it's just this weird stretch through the night tonight. That's it. Once we get to like 11 a.m., we'll be good. But it's just, can we get through that 2 a.m. to 8 a.m. stretch?
Tune in Friday to find out how my plants are doing.
So I got a fun one coming up Friday night on the Greg Tompsett Sports Show. I've got some of our favorites coming on. I got Brett Coleman, I got Cole Jackson, I've got Destin Adams, and our own Anthony Prohaska, and we're going to be doing the draft. So we're going to be going through and draft, like fantasy football style, drafting draft classes to see, just to rank who we think did the best, which teams had the best draft class for this year, all the way down through. And we're going to go through all 32 teams. And I think it might be more fun at the end to force them to pick who are the least favorite draft classes out of everyone. So we'll be able to have some fun comments back and forth and just see who we think helped their team the most, and I left it pretty open on their logic. It can be, who they think helped their team the most, who had the best values, who had the best high-end prospects, who, filled the need the most, all kinds of different things. So it should be fun. I'm looking forward to it and get a really good panel to be able to help us out with it.
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. on that note, make sure you're checking out everything we have going on at Cover One, all kinds of good stuff with shows for you each and every night throughout the week. And as you see down in our lower right here, we are looking for potential new sponsors. So some openings that we have for specifically Aaron and I's show for the Cover One Buffalo podcast. We are looking and opening up to new sponsors. The first time we've done that in a little while here. So if we are the kind of show that you think reaches an audience that would be impactful for your company, your product, your services, then let us know. We are talking back and forth and having discussions with a few different companies and want to open up options for everybody.
Yeah, we're open to whatever, right?
Yeah, that DMs are, as the kids say, the DMs
Slide
are
on
open.
in.
The DMs are open.
Is that what they say?
I heard it once. So we appreciate you guys. The chat was awesome tonight. Really appreciate Danny jumping on, our awesome producer Chris Kepner keeping all the comments flowing. But thank you guys very, very much. On behalf of Chris Kepner and Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You've been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.